revealed that King was an informant. Another thing, I can't remember whether this was immediately before or immediately after, but we also discovered that he was connected to a gang called the Dirty Dozen. So the Dirty Dozen was a paedophile ring which was implicated in the deaths of at least 3 children: Mark Tildesley, Barry Lewis, and Jason Swift. One of the leading members of that gang was a guy called Lenny Smith. We had a source who came forward in 2017. We codenamed him Victim 6 because at the time, to our knowledge, he was the 6th victim to have spoken to the police in the modern reinvestigation that was sparked by our reporting. So he rang in and said, the police have come to my door asking me questions about my childhood, and I've told them that I was abused, but I'm not really happy with the way that they're handling the case. He felt they were trying to cover everything up. So he started communicating with me in 2017, and over more than a year, I interviewed him numerous times, recorded interviews with him, and so he started communicating with me in 2017. In 2018, I meet this source who has the stack of paperwork, including the informant document. As I look through this source's paperwork, just huge amounts of information that are contained within this paperwork are corroborating what Victim 6 has been telling me for more than a year. Names, locations, the lady who had underage girls in her flat that the police were visiting, all of this information is in the documents from 1989, 90, and 91, and is now corroborating what Victim 6 is telling me in 2017, 18. But Victim 6 tells me something which is not corroborated in any of the documents, as far as I can see initially, which is that there was a man who was connected to the Shoebury ring, whose name was Lenny Smith. And he never met Lenny Smith. He didn't know who he was. He just knew that King and Tanner used to threaten the children. If you try and escape, we'll take you to Lenny Smith. Which is exactly what I did not want to hear, to be perfectly honest, because this, as I say, this was right around the time that the Exaro thing was all blowing up in their faces, and people were trying to discredit historic abuse cases. There were a number of celebrities who'd been prosecuted under Utri and had been acquitted. And there was a bit of a backlash going on against the whole historic abuse situation. Carl Beech's allegations were starting to fall apart. And what I did not want, to be honest, was somebody coming to me and saying, oh, yeah, there's this connection to the Jason Swift case, because I thought this is now veering into the realms of like conspiracy theory, internet territory. And so I thought, oh, no, this is bad news. So I had to try and corroborate this. One thing that Victim 6 did was he was, as I say, was in touch with the police, and he kept saying to them, will you please take me on a drive around so that I can tell you all the locations where I was abused, so you can investigate because he didn't know the names of most of his abusers, because pedophiles are not that stupid. They don't take you to be abused by someone and show you their passport. They use nicknames, so on. So he was volunteering for a long time for Essex police to take him on a drive around, and they wouldn't do it. So in the end, he said, I'll take you on a drive around. So I got in the passenger seat of his car, and he just drove around Southend, pointing out locations to me. I wrote down all of these addresses, and later went to the Public Records Office in Southend and checked every electoral register from 1978 to 1993-ish, for every single one of these addresses, to find out everyone who'd ever lived there, and found that at one of the addresses there was a guy called Jack Parsons. Well, Jack Parsons was a child abuser who was linked to Lenny Smith. They had lived together in Southend, it transpired, and had run an amusement arcade together, which they had used to groom children. This was all reported, it turned out, back in about 1993 by two journalists called, I hope I don't get this wrong, I think Ted Oliver and Ramsey Smith. They wrote a book called Lambs to the Slaughter. So I thought, right, that's interesting. I've got a link here between Victim 6 and Jack Parsons, but not between Victim 6 and Smith. Smith is not on the electoral register.
Mm.
However, I then meet a citizen journalist whose name is Martin Walkerdine, who has just been running his own investigation into the Dirty Dozen case for years. And it turns out he has a copy of Lenny Smith's prison records that he got under Freedom of Information. He shares those prison records with me. And would you believe it? In the early 1980s, Lenny Smith goes to prison and he gives his address to the prison. And the address that he gives is the address that Victim 6 has taken me to.
Wow.
Where Jack Parsons lived. So we were able to demonstrate corroboration there for Lenny Smith's connection to the ring. So Victim 6 would be taken to that address by Dennis King, and that is the former address of Lenny Smith. Albeit, as I say, Victim 6 does not, to his recollection, he never met Lenny Smith. He only remembers that him being spoken about as being involved in the ring. So that was a major discovery that we made also, and potentially also connected to King's informant status. I mean, we've never found any evidence to corroborate this, and all of the police records in the Jason Swift, Mark Tilsley, Barry Lewis murder cases, they have all been sealed by the government for about 100 years. So probably within my lifetime, we will never know if Dennis King ever cooperated with that investigation. They're all held by the National Archive in Kew, and no particular reason is given for why they've been sealed, but they've been sealed until about 2080, something like that. So is it
It's incredible to understand the process by which you seal information for so long, where, you know, especially things that have happened, you know, back then, there's victims are around, you know, they at least having that story out and having some form of closure would bring something to them. I mean, it's just interesting for me to ponder why something like that would need to remain secret for 100 years. But I don't know, in the course of your investigation, whether you found what the rationale behind it is, or whether it's sort of a blanket thing that can't be changed. Or...
Well, I think the alleged rationale is that the contents of the files is upsetting to the family members, so they don't want any of the files published, while any of the family members who knew the victims would still be alive. I believe that is the alleged rationale. However, there was a public trial. They don't do this in every case. They don't seal the records in every case. So it does lead you to wonder what it is about this case in particular that has merited the sealing of the files. I mean, there's various conspiracy theories online that, you know, because we do know for a fact that there were members of parliament who were involved in the abuse of children. That was revealed by ICSA, the National Inquiry into historic child sexual abuse. There's a very good book called Playland, which talks all about the establishment's involvement in abuse of young boys. So somebody was procuring boys for these kids, for these men, procuring kids for these men. So it's very, very feasible that the Dirty Dozen would have been connected to that, or that the Shoebury Ring, or that both would have been connected to that. Because in many ways, the whole idea of a paedophile ring is a bit of a nonsense. So everybody, including the police, refers to paedophile rings, to abuse networks, What actually exists is one gigantic network of child abusers. And occasionally the police stumble upon part of that gigantic national network, because paedophiles everywhere are connected to paedophiles everywhere else. And very often they meet each other in prison and form associations with each other. And then when they get out, they know that they know a guy in Brighton, and they also know a guy in Lancaster, and they also know a guy in St. Ives. So it's far from fanciful that if somebody was procuring boys for people in power, which they were, we know that they were, it could have been connected to these people in some way. So what did King know? Did King inform on the Dirty Dozen? Who knows? I mean, we know that he was an informant, according to the police officer who ran the investigation into the Shoebury case. We've got that in writing. What was he informing on is a continuing mystery. We can only speculate, but the evidence points us in certain directions.
And